So just caveating this from the start, it is currently almost 1 o'clock in the morning here in South Australia, and my bedtime was about 4 hours ago, so apologies in advance. I also flew in from Canberra interstate. I was doing CubeSat testing over there and got home about 3 hours ago as well. So a little bit tired, but let's just see how we go. So yep, I'm Mark Jessop. I run one of the people that run Sondehub, and I'm also the lead of the Project Horus High Altitude Ballooning Group here in Adelaide. We've talked previously, done about 60 launches or so. We were one of the earlier ballooning groups in Australia. There were some before us, but we were the first that actually followed the rules, I think is the best way to describe it, and actually got permission to launch. Anyway, so hang on, let's try and get my focus correct. So this works. There we go. Okay, so just an overview, setting my timer going as well. So just a bit of what I'm going to cover, just introduction to Sondehub Amateur, what that is, how to get your flights on Sondehub Amateur, how to look at some cool plots and live data dashboards, how to get your telemetry out of Sondehub Amateur again, and how to make best use of it for your flights. Before I go any further, I've really got to say thank you to everyone that supports Sondehub. Sondehub is not free to run. It does cost us a fair bit of money. Thankfully, we have some great supporters. Our biggest contributor is ARDC, Tapper, effectively. We've managed to get some pretty good grants from them to help continue funding our hosting. We've also got a commercial sponsor in the form of GRAW, the second largest manufacturer of radiosondes in the world. And also, of course, Patreons. It's really important that we have that kind of ongoing funding to keep things running. Just to put it into perspective, Sondehub costs approximately $1,000 Australian to run per month. It's about 700 US, and that number does keep on going up with increased load. So Sondehub Amateur, a bit of a history. This started when there was an announcement of the HAB Hub. So you probably would have heard of HAB Hub, the ballooning tracking system born out of Cambridge University spaceflight in the UK. That was becoming unsupportable. Issues with just lack of people to maintain software, rising costs of hosting, and just maintenance of the servers. So there was an announcement that HAB Hub would be shut down. Sondehub itself, which was the radiosonde tracking site that we started back in 2019, that handles thousands of radiosondes per day. And our system is very scalable. We're hosted on Amazon Web Services. So we scale up and scale down based upon load to save costs. With radiosondes, our load is at very predictable times of the day, 4 times a day, 0, 6, 12, 18 Zulu. So in between those times, we scale way back and up and down as required. We can easily support amateur radio balloon traffic. It is a fraction of radiosonde traffic. So we decided to take advantage of what we'd learned in the Sondehub database and add support for amateur balloon launches. That we first got running in late 2021, and development is ongoing. It's in a pretty good state at the moment. There's definitely things we can improve, but it's working pretty well. HAB Hub finally shut down in the end of 2022, and I've really got to put a big thanks to Cambridge University spaceflight for developing all the software a very large proportion of the software that we're running. And also in particular, Anthony Stirk, who hosted the HAB Hub servers for free for something like 13 years in his data center. It's also worth noting that Sondehub is now the host for the predictor, so predict.sondehub.org, which I know many of you guys use, and the burst calculator as well, which helps you out, helps you out with your fuel calculations. Just as an aside in relation to the missile launch thing, the missile shoot down thing, this is a plot which shows approximately how many people have a copy of the Sondehub tracker, be it radio sonde or ammeter open at any one time of the day. We can easily see that information. Normally we see between 400 and 500 people with the tracker open. And then we got mentioned in a couple of news articles. The Washington Post article in particular took our page load count to over 4,000 simultaneous viewers. That would have taken down almost any dedicated server system. The fact that we were scalable meant that we survived that with only a relatively small increase in our hosting bill. So just gives an idea of what we're capable of in terms of handling load. So yeah, getting mentioned in those news articles definitely increased our costs for that month, but not as much as you'd think. So Sondehub Ammeter, I'm sure many of you have seen Sondehub Ammeter before. It's been used by many, many different flights. We've got our map, we've got our balloons on our map, we've got our list of payloads down the left-hand side, and we can look at the different payloads and get information on them. There's really not much to talk about here. This I think most people are familiar with. I guess some of the main features that Sondehub has over, and this is Sondehub Ammeter, I should say, over using, say, APRS.phi, is we do provide live predictions during the flight. I'll talk a bit more about that and how those can be configured later on. And there's also more information on telemetry and who's actually received the different payloads. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the tracker itself because it's a map and you can choose a balloon on the left-hand side. It's not that complicated, thankfully. I'll talk a bit more about what's going on behind it and how it runs. So Sondehub Ammeter takes data from a number of different sources to be displayed on the map. We have an API which anyone can submit their telemetry data to. It's an open API. The information on that is at the link there. There's also a library, which makes it a lot easier to submit data as well. That's written in Python. We're hoping to see some other languages supported as well. And via our API, we see telemetry from Horus binary payloads, which I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail. Bill requested a little bit more detail on Horus binary later on. The Rishi payloads are still supported to some extent. Unlike with HabHub, where a lot of the decoding of a Rishi string was done at the database side, that's been moved into the decoder. So my decoder, Horus GUI, and also Dave Ackerman's decoder, HabBase, that is where the separation of the different telemetry fields is done, which does mean that custom telemetry is a little bit challenging with RIDI at the moment, but there is support there for RIDI payloads still. We do have Whisper flights coming in directly via our API, the SA6BSS in particular, hopefully some more soon. And also there's some LoRaWAN data coming through as well from a number of different sources. And we also have an APRS gateway as well to get all the traffic that ends up in APRS. It's a bit more on that. So yes, we've been running an APRS gateway from the start. That was our test case. It was our easiest way to get in balloon traffic quickly for testing of this concept. We've had that running from the beginning. We don't ingest the entire APRS IS stream. We have some filtering applied when we connect to APRS IS. We only look for position reports, so objects. If you know what an APRS object is, we don't support that, only position reports. If you don't know what that is, probably doesn't matter. You're probably using position reports anyway. They must use the balloon icon. That's what we're filtering on when we connect to APRS IS. If you don't have the balloon icon, you won't end up on Sondehub. There's also other filters we're running as well, which help to block non-balloon traffic to a certain extent. For example, while there has been a significant effort recently to limit the amount of meteorological radiosonde traffic that ends up in the APRS IS network, there is still some ending up in there, and we block that kind of traffic to avoid cluttering up the map more than it already is. It's worth noting that we follow the APRS specification as written. Tick the libraries that we use, do that. For example, altitudes are meant to be in feet. There have been cases where some payloads were sending altitudes in meters, and they were wondering why their balloon appeared to be roughly 3 times lower than it actually was. It's because our altitude is meant to be in feet for APRS. I would love it to be in meters. I'm a metric country. I'm from a metric country, but APRS spec does say feet, so we treat it as feet. Follow the APRS spec. If the APRS packet provides a timestamp, we make use of it as best as we can. The APRS specification provides a range of timestamp formats, all of which have their own problems, but we do our best. The APRS specification also doesn't actually say that the timestamps all have to be UTC, but all the libraries that we use assume that. So please use UTC time. I haven't seen a case where that isn't the case yet, but it's just a word of warning. If you don't use UTC time, there may be some interesting things happening on the map. Our gateway is open source, as is everything else about the Sondehub project, and you can find some more information at the link below. So in terms of filtering, now, because we get a lot of traffic in via the APRS network, which is balloons that are on the ground, and also things that might have a balloon icon but are actually not balloons. There is a surprisingly large number of cars that seem to be using the balloon icon. I don't know why, but the example there on the right, that is not a balloon, that is a car, but it looks like a balloon. So anyway, what we do is by default, the Sondehub tracker will filter out, will not show APRS traffic if any of the position, or if it hasn't seen a position above 1,500 meters above sea level. That's just the default. You can change that. There is a setting for that. There's a setting for many things on Sondehub. Available from the top right-hand corner, the little gear icon, all sorts of settings. And one of these here is show low altitude APRS. If you turn that on, then there will be a lot more APRS payload showing up on the map. So if you're doing testing before your flight, you may want to tick that little check, or you may want to set that and turn that on so you see your payload on the ground. It's also worth noting that if you have a payload, if you're filtering to a certain call sign, so in the top left-hand corner there, I can type in a call sign. For example, this IT91. If you're filtering to a call sign or multiple call signs, the packets will show up on the map no matter what altitude they're at. So it's worth noting if you can't see your payload on the map while testing.
Question.
Sure, go ahead.
How do you enter the call sign? I'm looking at your page on a mobile device. How do I enter the call sign?
Yes. Not sure you can on the mobile device, unfortunately. It is possible via the URL, but that's a little bit difficult to explain right now, unfortunately.
I can figure that out.
Yeah, unfortunately, the mobile tracker does have quite a few features removed just because things don't fit very well. So very good point. Thanks for pointing out that one out.
Thanks for all you do.
Hey, Mark, I've got a question or a comment also. I moved to the Huntsville area, and about 2 months ago, I went to your website thinking, oh, this is a real cool thing to check out. And I look at Knoxville, Tennessee. And I put Google Earth on top of it, and it showed a balloon that was sitting on top of a building in the middle of downtown Knoxville, Tennessee. And I thought, I'm about to go check that out. Because somebody did launch a balloon and it landed on a building that probably would like to get their payload back. Now, I put the cart before the horse, and I didn't check the call sign first. I went downtown antenna blew off my vehicle and caused antenna damage, but I found the building. I talked to the owner of the building. They let me on top of the maintenance guy, and they own two buildings side by side because it kept dancing around from the parking lot to the building to the other building. And I'm like, I couldn't find it anywhere. I went home, I pulled up the guy's call sign, and he lived in that building. So I wrote him a nice little note, hint, hint, nasty Graham. I've even invited him to come here. I haven't seen him show up here. But I went and I knocked on his door and I handed him the note. And I said, I'm a ham radio operator that likes to chase balloons, and your balloon SSID showed up on the roof of this building. And it is not there. He goes, oh, wait, you mean this thing? And he brought the little APRS transmitter to show he had a balloon SSID in this little transmitter on the third floor of a 9-story building.
Yeah, this is the reason why we filter them out by default, to avoid that kind of confusion. But yes.
So could you guys put a filter in there that's not going to show the balloon until it goes up about 500 feet, and that'll rule out everybody with the exception of New York and Chicago?
Somebody said he was had.
Yeah, so we've got a filter on there right now. It's 1.5 kilometers above sea level. So there's a recent problem we've found. This is a problem with the US, I'm sorry to say. Your topography is interesting, particularly when you have states that are 1.5 kilometers above sea level. Normally makes our life a little bit interesting, but anyway, I won't go too much into that. I call it the Colorado problem. Also Wyoming and Utah, apparently. I'm learning about your geography as I go. So anyway, so telemetry.
I just wanted to share that with the group. Watch out.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so just watch out for that. So telemetry. Lots of balloon trackers seem to like throwing telemetry in the comment field of APRS packets in various forms. I'm going to say it's not the best place to put telemetry to make it be easily programmatically extractable, but we have gotten there finally. So there are a number of trackers where we support extracting telemetry from the comment field. Those are the StratoTrack, the Light APRS, Bill's tracker, and also the RS41NG APRS firmware as well. So Sondehub is designed to be able to plot this telemetry. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So we can now extract that telemetry and have it be displayable and plottable for those particular trackers. If you have other trackers which write telemetry into the comment field and you'd like to see that supported, please send me some examples of that, and I'll see what I can do to support it. It needs to be quite consistent, and I should be able to make that work. I'm also wondering whether anyone is actually using APRS telemetry packets. I know Mike has been doing that. We're considering adding support for it, but it seems like it isn't really used very much at the moment. So if there's more trackers that use it, then we'll consider adding support for it. So there's an example there on the right of a Light APRS tracker where I've extracted the temperature, the pressure, the battery voltage, and the number of satellites that are used as well. Also worth noting, the Light APRS's pressure sensor doesn't seem to work too well for balloon applications. It seems to die at about 300 HPA, which is a little bit sad. Other notes with the APRS payloads. If you don't have GPS lock, if you're writing firmware for APRS payloads, what I'm saying, if you don't have GPS lock, please send a latitude and longitude of 0, not whatever the GPS reports, because whatever the GPS reports is often quite wrong in these cases. This is an example of what happens when a payload, which actually doesn't have lock, is beaconing telemetry. It becomes an absolute mess. And it's also worth noting that the tracker does have a filter in it for if you provide the number of GNSS satellites are used in your solution, and that's set to 0, then it won't get displayed like this. But because with APRS, at least until recently, we didn't have the ability to read that information and make use of it because it was all in the comment field. That wasn't possible, and so we ended up with this kind of mess on the tracker. So that's just something worth noting. Sending positions without GPS lock is not a good idea. So Whisper payloads, we have a lot of Whisper payloads on Sondehub. But the majority of them arrive via APRS. Most of them at the moment via the LU7AA gateway. But there is definitely some work progressing towards getting them in directly to Sondehub, bypassing the APRS step. There are advantages in doing this. It means we can get telemetry data, battery voltage, that kind of thing, or solar panel voltage a lot easier. And look, the Whisper data, the WhisperNet data is very rich in metadata. So it'd be great to be able to show who's received, which stations received each of these position reports, what SNR they received it at, what frequency they heard it at. Sondehub can display all of this information, but when it goes via APRS, we lose all of that. All we see is whatever the gateway was, which is a bit of a shame. It's also worth noting that if you're pushing data into APRS or even into Sondehub, upload it as is with the time that it was received. Uploading with timestamps, uploading old data with new timestamps or out of order data can result in some interesting peculiarities on the map. For example, on the right-hand side there, that was some out of order data resulting in these weird kind of glitches on the map because the position was uploaded, this position in Western Australia here on the left was uploaded with a timestamp that was newer than the position over in Queensland here on the right, resulting in this jump on the map. And there isn't much we can do about that. We accept the timestamp as is. We have to make use of it in that way. So yeah, that's just worth noting. So what do you get if you use Sondehub with your Whisper payloads? Well, the main one is you get float predictions. Now, this is not, it's not high split. It's not the same as high split. We have considered adding high split support back in again, like HubHub used to have, but their API is a bit interesting. It also requires a bit more effort because we can't continually poll high split. So at the moment, our float predictions are done using GFS, which is the same weather model which is used for all the other predictions on Sondehub. We run an ensemble prediction, or our best attempt at one, where we take the reported altitude and we run predictions for altitudes in a range of ±1 kilometers from that altitude. I can't remember exactly what the step size is, but it's probably about 50 meters or something like that. And we run that prediction for the extent, approximately the extent of the GFS model that we have available to us. And
Mark,
that's shown on the map is that color code. Go ahead.
Mark is, so I'm looking at that. Is red the low end and blue the high end of that altitude?
It's 1 in the morning. I can't remember, unfortunately. The way to tell that is to click on it. So each of those little dots are clickable, and they tell you information about the prediction altitude. And if you look at the different dots, you can look at the altitude versus where the balloon's at, and that will give you an idea. It also shows the time where that point in that prediction is as well, so you can get an idea of where it will be at a certain time into the future. Now, it is worth pointing out that the GFS model, when we get a model, we can only predict backwards in time 6 hours approximately. So if the last position from a Whisper payload was, say, 12 hours in the past, the prediction that we run actually starts from a time 6 hours in the past. This is a limitation of using GFS. And it's also because we don't want to store more GFS models than we have to, which is one. Storing more than one to do predictions in the past becomes very, very expensive very quickly because the models are quite large. So just a word of warning. Honestly, for whisper balloon payload prediction purposes, it's good enough. Other points, the float button, which we see there in that little payload bit, will only become available if your calculated ascent rate is less than 0.5 meters per second. Otherwise, every single one of them will have a float button, and that will not make sense in most cases, particularly for up and down flights. So yes, so reporting altitude is very critical. So Bill, your payloads that are not reporting that are GPS lock, well, obviously if we don't know the altitude, we can't really do a float prediction very well. Other features that Sondehub will give you, this came into play about 2 or 3 months ago. If you filter to a call sign or a list of call signs, which can be comma separated, if you filter in the search box, you can look back longer than 1 week. You can look back to a year of history. There is some decimation done in the data. Just be aware of that, but it's good enough for display purposes. We are aware of the issue at what we call the anti-meridian. That's negative 180 degrees of longitude. The mapping library we're using has a bit of a limitation in how it handles tracks that cross over plus minus 180 degrees longitude. There is a fix which is possible. It's just complicated to implement. That's something that I'm working on separately. Not there yet, unfortunately. But you can search back and look at your flight paths over a much longer period of time than was possible about a year ago. So the other source of data, probably where Sondehub really got its start in terms of tracking amateur payloads is Horus binary. Bill's asked me to give a bit more detail on this, and Mike's to talk about it as well. So Horus binary as a mode that I developed with a guy by the name of David Rowe, who basically designed Codec 2, the open source voice codec. And he's basically a modem genius, really. He knows his stuff really well. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we decided to have a crack at our own balloon telemetry mode, which we called Horus binary after the Horus project. We settled on using 4 FSK for the modulation, and we were running it at a fairly low baud rate, so 100 baud. We run it on 70 centimeters, which is where we used to run our RIDI payloads as well. And our RIDI payloads never really ran at high power. We were only running 25 milliwatts. That was partly so we could also operate underneath our ISM band limits. So we could do commercial launches, for example, and adhere to those limits. So by using 4 FSK and lowering our baud rate, I mean, it's a bit of an unfair comparison because APRS runs at 1200 baud, but when you run the numbers in terms of actually getting packets through per time period, we have this gigantic advantage over APRS in terms of link budget. It's in the vicinity of 16 to 20 dB, which is very significant, resulting in a gigantic range increase, which is possible. So essentially, even at that kind of tiny transmit power, the reception range is really limited by your radio horizon, not a distance limitation. Just to give an idea of what I mean by that, I've done tests where I've taken a Horus binary payload, set the frequency to be the input of a satellite linear transponder. I think I used CAS4B, and I sat it outside at 25 milliwatts on a rock in my front garden and decoded it on the linear transponder's downlink. So yes, there's a linear transponder in the way, that does help, but that's a pretty significant path end to end. And it still decoded just fine. I had to do it with Doppler, but that's a different story. So the Horus binary telemetry format does have some customizability, which I'll get into on the next slide. The transmitters for this, the reference implementation of Horus binary is a reflashed Vaisala radio sonde. That was our first platform because around here, they're very, very common and they're free effectively. In the US, they're a little bit less common. Unfortunately, the DFM 17 is the most common radio sonde over there at the moment. However, there is work in progress to implement Horus binary for those as well. There are other implementations available. So RadioLib, which is a very popular library for doing radio transmission from various modules, that can do 4FSK now, at least the modulation side of it. And it can be received with an SSB receiver. So single sideband, it could be an RTL SDR, number of other options there to receive it. It's very easy to receive. This goes straight into Sondehub Amateur. Just some information on what we're sending over the air. The packets are 32 bytes long. That's all we need. Everything you need for a balloon tracker, a payload ID. So we've got 16 bits of payload ID. There's a lookup table, which allocates that to a call sign, and you get an ID allocated to yourself on our GitHub page fairly easily. Then we have time, position, altitude, etc. The fields there marked with the dashed lines, ascent rate, external temperature, humidity, pressure, those are just defaults. Those are customizable. So there's 9 bytes, a grand total of 9 bytes of customizability, which you can do a surprisingly large amount with if you put your mind to it. So we're packing in ascent rate, temperature, humidity, pressure, and a pulse count value into those 9 bytes without any issues at all. There's been a number of other variations on that as well. We're also looking at adding support for some larger packet formats as well, like 64 bytes and possibly even bigger. On top of all this, we have forward error correction, which is something that APRS does not have. So we run effectively rate 1-on-2 forward error correction, and then we scramble it and interleave it, which basically is a way of making that forward error correction work as best as it possibly can. There's a C library designed for the transmitter side, which handles all of this. You just pass it a pointer to a buffer of your 32 byte payload, and it does all of the forward error correction work for you. So sending it over the air, it's 4FSK, 4 tones. To actually transmit the 4FSK signal, at the moment, we're actually using the fine offset registers in the transmitter on the RS-41, and it turns out that that has a resolution of 270 hertz, which becomes our nominal tone spacing. So we just step it up and down to the appropriate tone by reprogramming a register at the correct rate, and there's our 4FSK. The first payload that did Horus binary was actually using a radiometrics module, which is effectively a VCO, voltage controlled oscillator in a can, and we had a little resistor ladder, which produced the different voltages, and that produced the modulation. You can do it the same way. Ahead of the frame, we've got a preamble, which helps with the modem frequency estimation, and a unique word, which helps with frame synchronization. You can actually avoid transmitting the preamble if you just keep on transmitting packets. And it's worth noting that the on-air time of a complete packet is about 3.2 seconds. So you could transmit a packet every 3.2 seconds if you wanted to, which results in some really nice high update rate data, which is really useful for getting a good landing position. Just an example of a flight over in Europe, showing this payload was at 17 kilometers. It's being heard 500 kilometers away. The station on the top right-hand corner, I believe, was running a Diamond X50 antenna into an RTL SDR. So that's an idea of what's possible. That is not the distance record. The distance record is way bigger than that. Yeah, effectively radio horizon becomes the limitation, or in this case, possibly not, because that blue line's meant to be the radio horizon, but I'm not quite sure I believe that. So Sondehub and plotting. So one of the cool things we added about a year ago, and we kind of been tweaking it ever since, is we've added a Grafana instance. So Grafana is a plotting system, does all sorts of cool dashboards, and that allows you to plot telemetry in real time. The simplest way to get to it is if you've got your flight showing up on the tracker, look for the plots button. Click on that and you'll be taken to a page showing what we have from your payload. The URL can be shared and passed around. And if you want to get into the weeds, you can go and build your own dashboards as well and customize it for your own flight. So I'll give you an example of that. So I think there was a flight over in the US that was, I think it was only about a few hours old. Let me just find it. No, it might have been a little bit older than that. Here it is, WE4UAH-1. I don't know who this is, but I did a balloon launch with a Stratotrack out of wherever that is. And there's the plots button here. I can click on that and it will load up our Grafana page. This also works on mobile, by the way. And there we go. We've got some plots showing the altitude profile, an estimate of the ascent rate. So it looks like they were getting about 2.5 meters a second ascent rate throughout their flight. And in this case, we're also showing the payload sensor data, the telemetry, which we've extracted from the comment field, which we have access to. In this case, that's temperature and pressure. So a very clear pressure profile, number of satellites, etc. And then we scroll down, we can also see other data as well. So voltage versus temperature over time. So we can see the voltage of the battery is tracking temperature pretty well. And also who received it. In the case of APRS, this is going to be who I-gated the packet. So that's shown there. Now, if we look at some other examples where we have a bit more data coming through, we can see what the dashboards can really show. So I'll pick an example of, this is a flight from Poland a few weeks ago, SP5LOT. And in this case, again, we've got the altitude plot, we've got satellites, we've got, in this case, that only had a temperature sensor, the other data was just all zeros. But this was a Horus binary payload. And all of the Horus binary payload receivers will upload information about signal noise ratio, so how well they heard the signal. And that's shown here. So we can see this particular station, let me find a good example, how its SNR varied throughout the flight. I can click on these little names at the bottom of the plot and look at that particular station. And so this is really helpful for optimizing your receive station. You can go look at this plot live if you wish and play with your antenna and see how it improves over the flight. And in this case, there were a lot of receivers as well. So this pie chart is getting pretty full, showing all these stations that received it. We also see the frequency throughout the flight. Interesting to see that drifting sometimes. And then there's the rest of the data as well. Other examples. So this was a dashboard that I put together for a launch I did at the beginning of the year, where we had multiple Horus binary payloads flying. This was a custom dashboard for that flight, where we flew a Geiger counter. And that was where that pulse count field in the telemetry came in that Horus binary packet. And we were sending down basically the raw pulse count. And in the dashboard, we take that pulse count value, we do the derivative of that, and we end up with counts per minute, which can then be translated into microsieverts per hour. That's all done in the dashboard. Really, it wasn't that hard to do. And then we have all the other data as well. So temperatures, and in this case, humidity as well, and pressure, and then all the signal to noise ratio data as well, all the other metadata for the flight. The pie chart, so around here, the pie chart is a bit of a thing. It came out of our early flights, and it's who has the most number of received packets wins, really. Which is usually me, because I'm usually at the launch site. But after me. It's who has the most number of received packets, and they like to. It's like a leaderboard. They like to get bigger numbers if they can. So extracting telemetry from the Grafana dashboard, we can also export telemetry. So as an example, I'll go back to our APRS flight, that WE4UAH. We've got our flight displayed. Down the bottom of the page, we have export data, CSV, KML, and JSON as well. You can choose that. So that's pretty handy. You can go and download a KML file of your flight. It's worth noting as well that in the Grafana dashboard, you can change the time range you're looking at. So what I'll do is, as an example, the top right-hand corner here, it's currently showing the time range. This has been set from that link that came from the tracker, that plots button. It set it to a certain time range where we knew we had data. But I can also do this, for example, what was in the last 12 hours. And that shows this bit of a weird plot. Let me maybe look at the last 24 hours as an example. Yeah, kind of works. The data is decimated, unfortunately. And there's also this problem as well. Sorry. That's a bug that I've got to fix. But there we go. There's our APRS payload. The last 12 hours. Obviously, our data is it's pretty much in that last 24 hours. Sorry. If I click and drag on this plot, it zooms in time. So you can go and choose your flight time period and then download that data. As another example, if I choose, say, the last 3 hours, now this is not going to show anything because this tracker hasn't been running in the last 3 hours. I can also have an auto update as well. So if there was a flight in progress, as an example, you could set it to show the last 3 hours, update every minute, for example, and you'll note that the URL has changed. The address at the top has all that information included in it. So now you can copy and paste that address and share it. And that will take them directly to this page with those settings, showing the last few hours and updating every minute. This is great for things like schools, where you can point them at a link and they will see that live data coming through. There will be a dashboard for your GPSL launch tomorrow in your time. It's still under construction. I'll be working on that tomorrow once I've had some sleep. Yes, I'm running on empty at the moment, but that'll be ready by the time the flights happen. So that will show all your altitude profiles for the payloads that have telemetry. I'll try and get them on here as well. If you have a tracker, could you please try turning it on at some point in the next 24 hours? That'll make my life a lot easier to make sure I know data's coming through. So other things? Yes, go ahead.
Maybe when you can fit it in, I don't want to interrupt your train of presentation, but when you can, I have a Pico balloon up, and if you went to your browser and brought that up on Sondehub, and then did the Grafana from that, that would be very instructive for, I think, some of the other Pico balloon users, and certainly for me, because I'm sending over telemetry from that, and it's appearing in the comment field, and it should correspond to SkyTracker. But I'm only seeing altitude in your telemetry on Grafana. So
what's your call sign?
It's NU7B-25. You're almost there. That one.
Right. So 25. That tracker, I'm not sure what that format is. That doesn't match up with the WBA ELK format that I'm normally used to. I think that's because sorry, it's because it's coming in via. I think it's because it's coming in via. It's a Whisper balloon coming in via APRS via a gateway. That we currently don't support that at this point in time, but we probably could. Anyway,
okay, I misunderstood, because I thought you said that you were supporting telemetry from gateway.
Yes, but from a WBA ELK tracker that's transmitting APRS directly, not via Whisper at this point in time.
Okay.
We'll get there. We'll get there eventually, believe me. Anyway, making best use of the Sondehub tracker for your own flights. So as you make changes, as you pan around and view things on the tracker, you'll note that the address at the top changes. This means that you can pan, zoom, change the map to a certain thing that you want, a certain setting, and then you can copy and paste that address and share it. And that will send visitors directly to that location immediately. You can also add in call signs for filtering. So NU7B-25, NU7B-21 as an example. That'll filter to just those two call signs, and you can copy and paste that link and share it. That's the best way of sending people to the tracker without cluttering it up with other payloads as well. That's pretty important. So predictions. This is more important for up-down latex balloon flights than Whisper flights. By default, the predictor which is used will use a prediction, a default of 30 kilometers burst altitude and a 5 meter a second sea level descent rate. This may not be what you're flying. If you want to change this, you can. Unlike on HabHub, where we couldn't easily change it, you get the option to change it yourself. So on Sondehub, top right-hand corner, little balloon icon. You do have to log in, but you can make an account or you can use a Google account if you want to. You just sign up, make an account. We go back to that same little tab again. You can now enter in a call sign. As an example, I'm going to pick my Horus call sign. If there's already data there, you can click query and it will show it. And then you can go and change it. You can set what you're actually flying. So in this case, I've got a flight coming up. It's going to burst at 35 kilometers altitude and have a descent rate of 4 meters per second. Hit submit. And from now on, all future predictions that are run on the tracker, at least during the ascent phase of the flight, will use those settings. Helps for more accurate predictions. After burst, it'll just use the current descent rate and extrapolate that out. This only really matters for the ascent part of the flight path, but it helps a lot if you're trying to get out there and recover your payload quickly. Other things you can do is you can plot your chase car on the tracker as well. The Sondehub Amateur web interface allows you to do this directly. It works best with a mobile phone where you have real GPS data. You need location services enabled for this to work. And if you turn it on, your car will end up on the map. So those that are playing at home can follow along and see where you are. Here's an example of a flight in Victoria where there were a lot of chase cars out that particular day. I don't know why they had so many, but they had fun. And it was great fun watching them all converging on the landing location as well. My balloon tracking software Chase Mapper will also upload this data as well. That's pretty much all I've got at this point. So I'm happy to take any questions, noting that I have hit my 45-minute window.
Hey, Mark, I have a question for you. If you want to do a prediction on a latex weather balloon of the landing site prediction, how do you set that up on a latex balloon?
Well,
That was what I just mentioned there. So you can change the prediction settings for a particular call sign.
Okay.
And that'll be what is used live by the tracker during the flight. Obviously, before the flight, you'll use predict.sondehub.org to do your regular flight path prediction.
Oh, I see. You have a float button there for a float to distinguish between a latex flight and a.
That float expected button is there to provide predictions for a balloon that's just been launched and is expected to float at a certain altitude.
Okay.
That's what that's for. In that case, it'll ignore the descent part of the flight profile, and it will just, once the prediction reaches that particular altitude that you set, it'll just run a float prediction from that point onwards. Very limited use case for that, but it's kind of what it's there for.
It'd be good for pico flights, so, okay.
It would be. The only issue is, and here's the caveat with the predictor. It requires, the predictor is tuned for flights that have an update rate faster than 1 minute. That is not most APRS flights, unfortunately, and it is definitely not Whisper flights. We need an ascent rate to be able to run these predictions. And it's difficult to get an ascent rate out of a Whisper flight in particular, just because the data is so coarse and is so few and far between. There is possibly ways of tweaking that. Again, once we have data entering, so one of the problems we have right now is differentiating Whisper or Pico balloon flights from other APRS flights, because it just comes in as APRS. We can't easily tell what's what. If we have data entering Sondehub directly with metadata telling us that it is a Whisper flight, which basically means it's a Pico balloon, because where else would you use Whisper, honestly? We could start to do special things for those particular types of payloads, but that really requires that extra information to be available. So this is a bonus. If you could feed data directly into Sondehub instead of going through APRS, we can start to do a lot more with it, and have those special cases.
Hey, Mark, I got a question. I tried your chase car function once. I turned it on. And I turned, yeah, the chase car.
Hello.
Hang on, there's a bit of background noise here. So there's a question from the audience there.
Yes.
Yes, it's Pedro.
Sorry, no, hang on. There's
Elius.
someone from the audience in the room, I believe, was asking a
Yes,
question.
I would like to talk a little. It's Pedro from Argentina.
Hang on a minute. There was a guy. Hang on a minute. There was a guy from the audience in the room that was asking a question. Just...
Let him go ahead, Mark. I'll ask mine.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead, Pedro.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, good night, or good day for everybody here. It's a pleasure to share this meeting, and I would like to thank the organization of the meeting, and especially to Mark for the good presentation on Sondehub. I would like to express that in the balloon community, Sondehub is very well appreciated for everybody. It's providing a free and excellent service, much better than the previous Hub. So I would like to thank Mark and Ms. Wheeler for providing this wonderful application. Also, I would like to say that I am from Argentina. My call sign is Elius7ABF from Buenos Aires. I'm with AMSAT Argentina, and we have a small application developed to track balloons, Pico balloons specifically, that is quite used. It's about thousands of users daily. This application is providing data to APRS uploading data. And that data, fortunately, is taken by Sondehub and shown in Sondehub that is in a very, very nice and useful way. We do provide through APRS the voltage, temperature, ascent rate, and what is more important, the sun degrees that the Pico balloon sees. So that is useful for balloon owners to see how much sunlight they have, thus they are provided that for providing information. So I would like, if possible, to ask Mark to include the information that is included into the text field of APRS that includes those data as voltage, temperature, ascent rate, horizontal velocity, and sun degrees. If that will be possible to have in Sondehub, will be fantastic. But once more, I appreciate, and everybody appreciates, what Sondehub is providing to the balloon amateur community. It's really an excellent service that we'll like to have it, and we see that it's on continuous evolving and providing more and more useful information to all of us. So again, thank you for listening, and thank you for everything that is done on this magnificent meeting. 73.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that, Pedro. Yeah, it probably is possible. I'll have to look into it a bit more. Noting that I am 6-7 minutes now over time, and I don't want to delay your conference anymore.
We did have one question.
Mark, I'll make this real quick. I bought a Sondehub Amateur and I turned my chase car feature on. And then later on, I turned it off and I checked in a week or two later and I still show up as a chase car. How do I turn my chase car off so I don't have all the amateur weird people looking at me?
Amateur weird people, yeah, that's me.
Right,
I'll take that.
You never know who's looking at your chase car.
It sounds like it might still be on, actually. I'll double check that because chase cars will disappear from the map after about 24 hours.
Okay.
So if it's still there after 24 hours, I mean, if you've got the page still loaded, it'll still show up. But if you refresh the page, it should disappear after 24 hours. If it hasn't, I'd maybe go check you haven't got a web browser open somewhere with it on still.
I'll recheck all that. I don't want to take any more time. It's bathroom break time for a lot of us at that coffee.
Yeah, maybe have a look at that. So anyway, thanks for having me. It's now 1:45 in the morning. I'm going to probably go to sleep. I wish I could hang around for the rest of the presentations, but I'm really about to fall asleep. So, so thanks all.